What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today we're going to be taking a deep look at the recoil characteristics in XDefiant, at least the ones that can be modified with attachments, because I keep seeing one big question pop up over and over again, and this is, what's the difference between recoil recovery and vertical and horizontal recoil control? And I did a bunch of testing with this, figured out exactly how these all work, and I wanted to share my results with you guys today. Now let's start it off with the easy ones, and this is, what's the difference between vertical and horizontal recoil control? I know, this one's obviously super self-explanatory, however, there is a little bit of nuance that I wanted to talk about here. But here are my side-by-side recoil comparisons. This is all done with the ACR 6.8. On the left, I'm using an attachment that helps horizontal recoil control by 5%. In the middle is my base recoil plots. And on the right, we've got our recoil plots with plus 10% vertical recoil control. And when it comes to vertical recoil control, this one's really easy to see the difference because these are being compared on a horizontal plane. So you can see the total magnitude of vertical recoil with that attachment on is noticeably below that top line that represents where our base recoil magnitude went to. And when I did pixel by pixel measurement here, on average, the recoil patterns with the vertical recoil control attachment was 9% lower than the base, which is within a margin of error there. So what this means is if you have a 10% vertical recoil control improvement, you're quite simply going to see roughly 10% less vertical recoil when firing your gun. And I know, that sounds super obvious, but it's not as obvious when we're looking at horizontal recoil control. And it turns out the horizontal recoil control attachments are far better than they look. So what I did with this one is for each of the recoil plots, I measured the exact pixel count here on how far that recoil plot would deviate horizontally from the first shot fired to the last shot fired. And when I took the averages of these, it turns out with a 5% increase to horizontal recoil control, we saw an average of an 18% reduction to the total deviation of horizontal recoil when firing an entire magazine with the ACR 6.8. So unlike the vertical recoil control, which appears to just be 1-to-1, if you see a 10% improvement, that's a 10% reduction overall. The horizontal recoil control attachments tend to have more of a stacking effect here, and as a result, a little bit goes a long way when it comes to horizontal recoil control. So that's the first big takeaway from this video that I learned with my recoil testing. Leaning into that horizontal recoil control can really go far. Next, let's talk about one of the big questions I've been getting. What is recoil recovery? How does this work? Is it okay to sacrifice in the recoil recovery department? Do you want to stack heavy toward recoil recovery? Well, with this one, I tested a variety of attachments that either improved or harmed our recoil recovery stats. And when you put them all side by side here, I'm not really seeing any super notable differences here with either decreasing or increasing the recoil recovery stat. So just looking at raw recoil, it appears recoil recovery isn't very important for a gun. But what does it actually do then, and why is it even a stat in the menus? Well, it turns out what recoil recovery is, it has to do with your center speed. But just as an explanation for what this center speed is, or this recoil recovery, as you're firing a gun, let's just say you're not touching your aim input at all. So on controller, you're not touching the analog stick, and on a mouse, you're not moving it at all while you're firing. With recoil, your gun will gradually climb upwards, and then when you stop firing, your recoil recovery will bring your point of aim automatically back down to your point of origin, which was established the moment you first pulled the trigger. Now this is a staple feature in most FPS games out there. It's nothing really out of the ordinary, except XDefiant does handle things a bit different, at least in the game's current state. Now the first thing is, their recoil recovery only takes place after you stop firing, whereas in many games, like in Call of Duty for instance, that center speed stat, which is comparable to recoil recovery, that's always applying. That will apply even between bullets that you're firing, and therefore improving your center speed in Call of Duty will also improve your recoil plots, which I've already established, that doesn't happen in XDefiant. So this recoil recovery only kicks in the moment you stop firing your gun. And in this case, with these attachments, if you put attachments on that harm your recoil recovery, it is going to take you a little bit longer to get back to your original point of aim after you stop firing the gun, compared to when you improve the recoil recovery stats, it's actually going to get back down to center faster after you're done firing. So that seems like it's something that could be helpful, especially with something like marksman rifles. With a slow rate of fire, when you pull the trigger and you fire your shot, there's a decent amount of recoil per shot, and obviously it would be nice to get that back down to your point of origin faster so you don't have to manually control that recoil too much. In saying this though, this brings us to the big problem with XDefiant, and this is something I have provided feedback on in the past, so the devs are aware of it, and perhaps they will be making some improvements to this in the future. But the thing that I discovered in XDefiant is, as long as you have zero input, you will always get this recoil recenter. However, the moment there's even just the slightest amount of aiming input, so even if I just decrease my dead zones a little bit too low on my controller to the point where you can't even perceive any stick drift, but technically there's a little bit there, The moment there's even a pixel of aiming input applied, recoil recovery disables entirely and it just won't be working for you. And in an actual in-game situation, of course there's going to be aiming input. You should be trying to manually control that recoil. And even if you aren't, you're going to accidentally be moving your mouse slightly or your right analog stick slightly. And what this means is in XDefiant's current state, recoil recovery is entirely useless as a stat. And this means don't bother trying to put attachments on there that help with recoil recovery since it's doing nothing for you. And don't worry about completely destroying the recoil recovery stat with attachments because it's not going to be hurting you at all. You're not getting recoil recovery anyway. Now, of course, this is something I will keep you guys updated with if the developers end up working on this and improving it so recoil recovery actually works for you at all times. If that does happen, I'll likely make an updated video and I'll be sure to come back and leave a pinned comment on this video as well. But at least as of right now, just know the recoil recovery stat means effectively nothing at all in XDefiant's current state. And with that, that is going to wrap it up for today's video. Just wanted to clarify some things when it came to recoil stats, since there has been a lot of confusion and a lot of questions about this. And of course, I am curious to hear from you guys in those comments down below. How are you guys feeling about the results that I found in today's video? Were you surprised to see that recoil recovery is useless? And also, how do you feel about the fact that your horizontal recoil attachments seem to stretch a lot farther than your vertical recoil attachments? Just let me know all of those thoughts down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.